size matters? This is a question.
Well, the answer is it depends. She actually makes a statement that it's orgasm is as non-functional as nipples in men.
Oh,
We have women do clitoral and vaginal and cervical self-stimulation. And then as a control, we said, okay, now don't do the stimulation. Just think about it. Men who have premature ejaculation, by giving them low dose of SSRIs, of the same kind of drug, it enables them to go have a longer period of stimulation, more gradually increase to intensity, and then they have normal orgasms.
right.
I don't know, they say that when you retain your semen, it has a lot of nutrition and it can help you perform better in your life, better focus and all these things. So a lot of scientists have disproved these kind
I
of...
don't think so.
Really? So right now you're just destroying a lot of careers of self-help gurus. Dr. Barry Komisaruk, let's talk about sex. Because a lot of people are afraid to talk about sex in general, and I think it's very important to talk about it, and from a person who has done a lot of work in that particular domain. So thank you so much for coming again. So yeah, so let's...
Thank you for your interest.
Yeah, thank you so much. And let's directly dive into this. And I just want to understand, because you have worked a lot around the orgasm part, and you have written 2 books on that. And I've also read your research paper, which you sent me a few days back. It's really good research. So I just want to first start off with this, because I have been always interested in the evolutionary biology, how things are explained, whatever we are doing right now, how is it explained from the evolutionary perspective? So I just want to ask first, how exactly orgasm or sex came as a, in the
evolve?
nature, it evolved. Because I personally, what I think, my theory or my hypothesis is, without any research, it's more about it was just a way of procreation initially, and eventually it become the enjoyment part, the pleasure part became the primary reason. But maybe I'm wrong on this part. So if you can shed light upon this part.
Well, there's really, it's impossible to do experiments of this type on evolutionarily, the adaptive effect of orgasm. And I've speculated on it, and some other people have speculated. But I believe that one of the functions is in terms of the pleasure. Because if it didn't feel good, people wouldn't do it, and animals wouldn't do it. So, of course, animals may not experience orgasms the way humans do, but nevertheless, sexual response, sexual stimulation, it must. If it didn't feel good, animals wouldn't do it. So, sexual behavior and the pleasure of sexual behavior, I'm sure, is an evolutionary pressure.
Right.
The pleasure of it.
Yeah.
In terms of what the function of orgasm is, I think that there are several possibilities. In the case of women, there is evidence that when the uterus contracts under the influence of orgasm, it actually pulls the sperm into the uterus.
Right.
It's called an inssuck effect.
Yeah. I read about it. Yeah.
So that is a function of the uterine contractions that are stimulated by orgasm, and stimulated by orgasm is that during the orgasm there's a release of oxytocin from the posterior pituitary gland, which as the oxytocin put in the brain is produced in the brain, and the oxytocin gets into the bloodstream and contracts the uterus. So that happens strongly at orgasm.
Right.
So that's another adaptive mechanism to facilitate procreation.
Yeah.
Reproduction is so important, obviously, in order for us to get here, that there are many multiple mechanisms that ensure its success, its redundancy. So while while any one process is not essential for procreation, nevertheless they add up, and they work in the same direction. They all facilitate it. So Elizabeth Lloyd has a book, The Case of Women's Orgasm, and she claims that there is no function for women's orgasm.
Okay.
And she actually makes the statement that it's as non-functional, or orgasm is as non-functional as nipples in men.
Oh,
She makes that specific case. But yes, of course, orgasm is not necessary for procreation, but it helps. It facilitates it by this uterine contractions that pull in the sperm.
Right. So when you talked about this insuction part, like I have this point, like the orgasm is facilitating that insuction, and then like we basically procreate. So this means that the extreme the orgasm is, the higher probability of getting pregnant?
Actually, there is a study that shows where they studied the effect. This is a little bit complicated, but one thing they found, this is by Wilt in Austria, one thing they found was that typically the one ovary or the other ovary ovulates, the left or the right side ovulates at each month, and what he found is that the sperm. And he used radioactively labeled particles that mimic the sperm, that they travel through the uterus and into the fallopian tube to the side of the ovary that just released the eggs, not to the other side, preferentially.
Right.
It's not 100%, but there's a significant preference for the movement to the ovary that just released the egg, which is also an adaptive thing, rather than to the non-ovulating ovary on the other side. And he showed that in women who show that tendency, because not everybody does, but in the women who do show that, they had a higher probability of being pregnant, of getting pregnant.
Got it. And that ovulation period,
again, it's an incremental effect.
Okay.
So these multiple, and probably the reason that the mechanism for the particles to go to the side that ovulated, not to the other side, is that the ovary releases progesterone, and that can relax the fallopian tubes on that side to reduce the resistance through them. So it's probably that kind of mechanism.
Right. So it's like one of the added thing which can lead to this. Like that's not the only thing which can
that's
increase
right.
the chances of pregnancy.
So these are additive processes.
Right.
And that's that whole process is intensified by oxytocin.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
So again, the oxytocin released at orgasm increases the whole probability of that process occurring.
It's like a chain effect.
It's a chain effect, right? It's additive, and those women have a higher probability of getting pregnant than women who don't show that.
Got it. So
now that's for women, but for men, in addition to the pleasurable aspect of orgasm, the ejaculation occurs at orgasm, and the neural process of orgasm is a buildup of excitation, of neural excitation. That it's a process called recruitment, where the repetitive genital stimulation brings more and more and more neurons into activity in synchrony.
Right.
And that has the ability to by having, it's like the soldiers marching across a bridge, and if they're always told to stop to get out of not to march, but to be out of synchrony, because they can make the bridge collapse by the rhythmical marching.
That's a good analogy. Like, it's really good.
So in the case of genital stimulation, the repetitive genital stimulation recruits more and more and more neurons, and the effect of having more and more neurons active simultaneously is that it can activate a new system that has a high threshold to begin with. So, in other words, it's a system that is relatively difficult to activate, requires very intense activity, neural activity. So the orgasm process is a mechanism to get the more and more neurons activated simultaneously to be able to activate a resting system that has a high threshold. In other words, difficult to activate.
Right.
That's the ejaculation system.
Okay.
Because the ejaculation system requires a high intensity of activation in order to trigger it.
Got it.
We don't walk around ejaculating all the time, right? It's so in order to get that system activated for release of sperm, it requires intense stimulation, and stimulation per se is pleasurable.
Yeah.
And people say, well, what kind of stimulation? Stimulation has to be special.
Yeah.
But just think, I maintain that any stimulation, any sensory stimulation, if it's not too intense and adversive, it's pleasure. That is what pleasure is. In other words, neurons need stimulation to survive. If they don't get stimulation, they die. Right. For example, if in experiments where they put an eye patch over one eye in newborn kittens and left it there for several weeks, the visual pathway, the visual neurons going to the visual cortex in the back of the brain, that whole system died out. Okay. Because there was no activation on that one side. Okay.
And is this related to like the pain part also? Because in one of the...
It's related to pain, yeah. Because if the intense... So, yeah, I'll get to that.
Yeah, okay.
So, any sensory stimulation is pleasurable. You say, well, what about, just tactile stimulation? That's not pleasurable. It's just... But imagine that if, we were aware sitting, that's everyday stimulation. I wouldn't call that pleasure. But think of a person with a spinal cord injury who doesn't have that sensation. And imagine that suddenly it will be restored. It would be wonderfully pleasurable to them. So in other words, we're habituated to the sensory stimulation that we experience all the time. Right. So so I think that any sensory stimulation and the novelty. I mean, if it's not continuously there and habituated, like when we're sitting, any stimulation is pleasurable, unless it's too intense, in which case I mean, in other words, the brain is designed to do again what you just did if it's beneficial, but if it's detrimental to the well-being of the organism of the nervous system, then don't do it again. And
the body responds to that in a way that it tells you that, okay, don't do this because this can be a detrimental thing for you.
Yeah, and that's pain. That's where the pain is.
Okay, got it. So before coming to the pain idea, I just want to talk about few points. Like how much dopamine plays a role when you are trying to stimulate, when you want to stimulate again after the first stimulation. And I think that kind of dopamine release which happens in the stimulation is something which leads to repeat that task again, right?
Yeah, that's probably, yeah. But I think when you think about neurotransmitters like dopamine or the opioids or serotonin, you have to realize that what those transmitters are doing is that they're affecting a particular group of neurons because those neurons have receptors for those neurotransmitters. But ultimately, ultimately it's working on neurons. It's always neurons. It's amazing that everything that we experience is based on neuron activity.
Yeah, even this touch and anything like it's based on
anything.
Yep.
It depends on neuron activity, and neuron activity. There's only one thing that neurons can do. They can fire action potentials, and they can fire them faster or slower, not at all, or in different patterns, different syncopated patterns. But that's it. It's like Morse code. That's the only thing that our brain can do. And the neurotransmitters, we say, well, oxytocin is the love hormone. It's that different neurotransmitters stimulate or influence certain groups of neurons, but not others. So it's still ultimately it's the neurons all the way down.
Right.
It's only the neurons, and everything that we experience is based on this Morse code from neurons. That's all they can do.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So it's remarkable that every quality, the different sensory qualities and memories and pleasure and pain and everything, it's all neuron. It's all the Morse code.
Right.
And that's the so-called hard question.
Right. And because when you talked about pain and pleasure altogether, because in your book you mentioned about this thing, that there was an example that they mentioned that when the person was having a lot of pain, to reduce that pain, like if you just cut that nerve which basically communicates the pain to the brain, so the person also stopped feeling the pleasure.
Oh, well, no, it's not just pleasure in general. It's orgasm.
Oh.
Orgasm. If the people had the ventral part of the spinal cord traumatically damaged, but not the ventral part, like the belly part, but not the back part of the spinal cord. It's like if you imagine the spinal cord is a tube, then the bottom half of the tube, if the spinal cord is damaged, it blocks the pain pathway.
Oh, okay.
Specifically, so they can't feel pain below that level of injury because it can't get to the brain. Right. The input from below that damage to the lower part of the spinal cord. Right.
It's around the coccyx part, like.
It could be at any level.
Okay, got it.
Any level, all the way from the coccyx all the way to the neck.
Right.
That a damage there would block the pain from anywhere below the level of that injury. So those people also lost the ability to experience orgasms.
Okay.
That was the experiment, Barrick and Light, 1993.
So how exactly this pain and orgasm related? Because when we talk about BDSM and all these kind of fetishes which people have, is it like somehow related that people, when it comes to BDSM, people like the pain or the orgasmic part of it? Like how exactly it is related?
Okay, that's a very interesting question, and really nobody knows. It's talk about difficulty getting a grant or getting approved through an IRB,
to test this.
To do research on that.
Yeah.
But first of all, let me finish this. The interesting thing about that study, that they lost not only did they lose the ability to have pain below the injury, experience pain coming from below the level of the injury, or experiencing orgasm, but because the touch pathway travels in the upper part of the spinal cord, like the upper half of the tube, they could feel the genitals. And they used vibrator on the genitals. This is men and women.
Okay.
With this kind of injury to the spinal cord. halfway. They could feel the genitals, and they could, using the vibrator, they could have very intense stimulation. And they had the sense of very intense stimulation, but no orgasm from it. So there's something unique about the pain pathway. Orgasm uses the same the pain pathway. Right. And what we've seen in our brain imaging with orgasm is we map the number of we map the regions of the brain that are active during orgasm in women and in men. And when I compare the work in the literature on which parts of the brain respond to pain, there are about we see about 9 specific regions that respond to pain, and every one of them is activated during orgasm. So the same brain regions that are activated by orgasm are also activated by pain.
That's interesting.
And not only that, but in each of those regions, there is a concentration of one of 2 different inhibitory interneurons. In other words, it's like a sandwich. That the orgasm activated brain regions and the pain activated brain regions, and between them there are inhibitory interneurons, because about half the neurons in the nervous system are inhibitory, and the inhibition is very, very important. Inhibition in the nervous system, without inhibition our movements would be spastic. It would be out of control. Right. And the inhibition is going simultaneously with the excitation. There's inhibition when the simplest reflex, like the knee-jerk reflex, you kick out at the same time. We're hardwired to have inhibitory neurons inhibiting the antagonistic muscles that flex the leg, bring the leg back. And conversely, if we activate a flexure reflex to contract the leg, the opposite muscle is inhibited, is also actively inhibited. It's that the sensory stimulus is hardwired to send an excitatory neuron to one muscle and an inhibitory neuron to the antagonistic muscle, the one that works in the opposite direction.
Right. So just to put it in a simple way, and just to get my brain through explain this part, is it basically in the same path, and we are just moving like this, and there's a divider between these 2 paths, right? In the same neural path, right?
The same neural pathway. With, it's like an Oreo cookie, The 2 halves, the 2 cookies. One cookie is orgasm, the other cookie is pain, and the cream inside is the inhibitory interneurons.
Got it.
So there's plenty of evidence that pain can inhibit orgasm. But people in pain, they lose the ability to have orgasm. They can't do it. But on the other hand, we have very strong evidence that orgasm strongly inhibits pain. So they inhibit each other. You activate one system, it inhibits the other. So that's the way the system works.
That's a very detailed explanation of how exactly these things work, and very interesting.
Well, they share. Now, what is common? The question is, why do they share? Why does orgasm and pain share the same pathway?
Yeah, that's a good.
And what is common to them, the same to both, is that that pathway strongly activates the reticular activating system. The reticular activating system is in the lower brainstem, and it sends. The way I describe the recruitment of neurons to get to orgasm, the repetitive stimulation gets more and more neurons activated to finally activate a high threshold system. So in the case of the reticular activating system, when it's turned on, it spreads activation all over the brain to everywhere, and that sort of gives all the neurons a head start because they get partially activated, they get halfway activated, so that a stimulus coming in that would not activate some brain region if the person is asleep, when the reticular activating system is decreased its activity.
Yeah.
When it's active, and it puts the term is a bias, a bias on the neurons throughout the brain to make them half receptive. Then when you get a stimulus that comes in, it adds to that, and it triggers a neuron, triggers neurons in some particular region that would not otherwise be activated.
Right.
So it's a sensitization mechanism, a general sensitization mechanism that is what the orgasm and the pain pathways share.
Yeah, but so I have just this quick question, because when you say like they have the same path, right? So when we are like as a person not stimulating to get the orgasm, right? And we are we are sleeping basically, and we are not stimulating our genitals to get that kind of orgasm, but we might get hit by something while we are sleeping and get that pain-inducing nerves travel to the brain from the same path. So is it a possibility that you can experience orgasm like while sleeping also, because it's the same thing? It's like just something which came to my mind.
Yeah, people definitely experience orgasm when they sleep. Orgasm, and this brings up you're raising really important questions that I don't want to forget the BDSM question that you asked, but you're asking about a orgasm that it occurs during sleep that is not in response to genital stimulation. So there are a number of ways to explain that. First of all, during dreaming sleep, when these orgasms occur, or even with ejaculation, the brain is active, but there are many different systems in the brain. So the brain can be active, but the motor system is inhibited.
Okay.
At the same time.
Which system again?
The motor system, the movement.
Okay, the movement. Yeah.
It's called the motor. There's a sensory system, which is the input, and the motor system is the output.
Right. So we are not basically not moving. Yeah.
So, and in fact, that condition during which REM sleep occurs, rapid eye movement sleep, and dreaming sleep, the brain is active, but the motor system is inhibited. Yeah. And it's actually called paradoxical sleep.
Okay. Please explain what exactly paradoxical
sleep is. Well, the animal, it refers to animals, not the people, but it's the same process. The cat or the dog is sleeping, but the brain is awake. The brain is active.
Oh, okay, got it.
If you do EEG recording, it shows high activity in the brain, but the animal's flat out, not moving.
Right.
And so that's been given the term paradoxical sleep.
Is it different from the deep sleep which people often go into at night at a certain point of time?
That's a different thing. That's when things really calm down.
Oh, okay.
So it's a different phase of sleep. So the brain can be active during sleep.
Right.
And I have actually a paper on what I call non-genital orgasms.
Yeah.
And actually, I have to say that this is my most highly cited paper. For some reason, people are really interested in that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it sounds trivial for a podcast, where, but now I've had, it's about, I'm up to about 45,000 reads on that paper. But, that's compared to, it's very, very common to have, if you look up Google Scholar and the number of citations for scientific papers, it's to have 100 citations is good. So here, anyway, but so there are many situations or many reports of people experiencing orgasm, men and women, from all different parts of the body. Okay. So what I think is the common process there is that the sensory stimulation of, they describe having a hand orgasm or a lip orgasm or nipple orgasm or a foot orgasm, that the common factor is the muscle contraction, the feeling of the muscle contraction, the sensory input generated by the intense muscular contraction. So I think that if there's anything like that, so there are many kinds of non-genital orgasms that people have described, so in the brain, what we have seen surprisingly is that when and this was a chance observation, but it's very reliable, that we see is very reliable, that we did control. What we were doing, we had women do clitoral and vaginal and cervical self-stimulation. And then as a control, we said, okay, now don't do the stimulation, just think about it. Just think about the stimulation. Okay. And when they did the actual physical stimulation, it activates a very local region of the sensory cortex. There's actually a map of the body input on in the brain in the so-called sensory cortex, which is a thin band of tissue right over the top of the.
It's just behind the prefrontal cortex.
It's not just behind it; it's right over the top of the head. Got it. Like if you have earmuffs, it's right over there. It's a band right like that, and so when they do the genital self-stimulation, we get activation in a very specific region of the sensory cortex. Okay. And when we asked them to just think about it, we got activation in the very same region of the sensory cortex, the genital sensory cortex. Just thinking about it. But there was a big difference. And the big difference was that when they were thinking about it, the prefrontal cortex was very active.
Exactly, yeah, that's what I was saying.
And when they're actually doing the stimulation, it was very little activity in the prefrontal cortex. So the thought was able to generate activation in the genital sensory cortex. Right. So that's like it's a virtual reality. Exactly. There's no genital stimulation. So if that can happen, then it's not surprising that something like that could happen in sleep. Right. Without the relevant stimulation, just thought, just a dream, or an erotic dream, it could do it. It would. Right. It could do it. That's how powerful the brain is.
Yeah. But like in the more common perceptible human thought, it's like not possible for people to think that we can get orgasm just through thinking.
No, actually, we did a study. We had a colleague, Gina Ogden. I did this with Beverly Whipple, who was a co-author of the G-Spot. Okay. And her colleague, Gina Ogden, said that she was a sex therapist, or is a sex therapist, and said that women have told her that they can have orgasms just by thinking. Really? And I said, well, okay, right. I thought that was, I was very skeptical. So what we did, we had previously shown that with Beverly, that vaginal self-stimulation produces a very powerful pain blockage.
Okay.
Very, that's been replicated. It's a very strong effect. And women describe that they do vaginal self-stimulation to control menstrual pain and back pain and neck pain.
Yeah. That's interesting.
So a very strong. So that's very strong, and it gets particularly strong at orgasm. The pain blockage, it peaks, and there are other indications of orgasm, like increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, and also the pupils in the eye dilate.
Dilate, yeah.
So those are indicators of orgasm.
Yeah.
So we did a study. We got 10 of these women who claimed that they could have orgasms just by thinking, and we said, okay, we're going to measure your pain threshold and the pupil diameter, the blood pressure, and the heart rate. And we're going to ask you to have an orgasm just by thought alone, and then also have an orgasm by actual genital stimulation, self-stimulation, and we'll compare. Yeah. We'll see. So we did the experiment on 10 of these women.
Okay.
And when they said that they had thinking, they call it thinking off. when they had their orgasms by thought only, we got increases in each of those measures comparable to when the same women did the self-stimulation with physical stimulation and had a physically induced orgasm.
Oh, that's
so they really did have orgasms.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what do you? How are you doing that?
What is the superpower?
How are you doing that? And they said it's all different ways. They have very abstract. Some were very abstract. Some were, one said when I was thinking of my lover whispering in my ear, and somebody else, one of the other women said, I feel I could feel the chakras going up and down my spine. I was moving the chakras up and down. And another woman said that she thought of walking on the shore on a sunny afternoon, on a warm sunny afternoon, looking at the ocean. So everybody had different strategies for doing it, but they really had orgasms.
It's like, what is the case in the male counterpart when it comes to like thinking?
Some men have claimed that they can. We haven't studied men, but some men have sent me emails saying that they have the ability to do that.
Okay, that's interesting. So, like after, because you said like you haven't done any research on the BDSM part, like, but with all these researchers, can you extrapolate the question which I asked about like the BDSM part and the pleasure? And
so the BDSM, there really is not research on the physiology of it, and there could be several possibilities. One is that those people are just insensitive to pain.
Oh, okay.
I don't think that's very interesting, but I mean, it's a possibility.
More like very sadistic thing like to say when it comes to like, the pain part, but it's interesting, like they are not sensitive to pain, but they
have a high threshold, so they can tolerate it. Yeah. I don't think that's the answer. Another possibility is that which also I don't think is that interesting in terms of the pain blockage system, is that they have a safe word. In other words, if the stimulation gets too aversive, they say stop. So they're in control of the pain. And if we're in control of pain, we can tolerate it. And even choose it, like exercise. Right. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger says, no gain without the pain for muscular exercise. Right. If you want to build your muscles, you have to experience the pain of straining the muscles. Yeah. So and running a marathon with it can be painful. So people experience pain for a greater gain.
Right.
And this may be a psychological aspect in the BDSM, that they experience pain maybe to please their partner. But they have control in all those situations. We have control. If the pain gets too intense, you stop exercising. You know, and so if the pain gets too intense, they tell the partner, use a safe word, and they stop. So that's another possibility, which also I don't think is. I think it's plausible, but it's not as interesting to me. I think the interesting one is that the sexual excitement can have an inhibitory effect on the pain, but not only inhibit it, but enable it to increase in intensity. And I think that is actually a process that occurs in the natural genital self-stimulation or genital stimulation to get to orgasm. That the excitation keeps increasing, but with the inhibition going along with it, it prevents the excitation from becoming becoming too intense. And by continuously increasing the intensity of the stimulation with the repetitive stimulation, but also simultaneously increasing the inhibition, it enables the excitation to get to a higher level
with the same travel with the pain,
but without becoming aversive. And that's why I thought that a good metaphor for that is hot and cold water, hot and cold running, a hot faucet and a cold faucet.
Exactly, it's coming together. And
that you could have very hot water coming out of the faucet at a low intensity. It's hot, it's painful, but it's just painful on one finger because you have a little bit of water coming out, and then you can turn on the cold water to a little bit and make it warm, make the sum warm, not hot or not cold, and that's comfortable. But then you can turn on the hot water more and get a flood, and then the whole hand gets hot. But then you can turn on the cold water more, and it gets comfortable, but there's a much greater flow. So I think that so my metaphor is that the flow rate is the number of neurons that are active. And the hot is neurons firing very fast, and the cold is neurons inhibiting those. I mean, there's specific inhibitory transmitters that inhibit the activity of neurons. So those could be increased in activity. So they can reduce the intense they keep the ratio going, so you can get the flow of the water more and more. And you can have a flood of hot water, but with a flood of cold water at the same time. You've enabled it you have tolerated it getting more and more intense without it becoming aversive. And then maybe, and this is a big question, maybe at the point where the inhibition can't get any higher, because there's a limit to how much inhibition you can have. Maybe that's the point at which it triggers the ejaculatory process, the ejaculatory mechanism, this high threshold system, and then it turns itself off. Then the whole thing turns off. You release the stimulation. So maybe in the case of BDSM, that's the process, that they get higher and higher intensity of excitation without it becoming aversive. And if it becomes aversive, then they use the safe word and stop it. But it's by getting the intense excitation with it could be genital, or it could be symbolic, whatever. It's just high excitation that is not so intense that it's aversive. And maybe that's the thing with BDSM. They're seeking intense stimulation, and there are plenty of examples of people seeking intense stimulation.
Yeah, exactly. But this is very surprising that
I remember. Let me just. There used to be a TV program many years ago called Hollywood Squares, and one guy was very funny, Charlie Weaver, and because they always ask funny, leading questions. So they asked him, how high do you have to be to jump out of a plane? And he said, well, about 3 days of heavy drinking ought to do it. That kind of. But the idea is, people jump out of a plane, skydiving. Right. This is not something I would do. This is not the kind of excitement I want. But that's really high intensity excitement, but it's not painful.
Right.
So people go for the high excitation.
And you know what, this is very interesting point, because I just got reminded of something. So the alcohol part which he's talking about, it's acting as anti-anxiety sort of thing, right?
Yeah, it's an inhibitory effect.
And you have seen a lot of reports where people talk about using drugs before having very intense BDSM sort of things. There were reports about that when people were having intense orgasm with BDSM, they were using drugs. And we see a lot of cases about that, in the rape scene and all these things. So I think this sort of anti-anxiety sort of thing which we use as a alcohol to reduce that anxiety level, to either jump off the plane or to reduce the intensity or the pain out of that BDSM orgasm.
Yeah, actually, that raises a very relevant point, that using this metaphor, I collaborate with Erwin Goldstein, who's an MD in San Diego. He's a director of San Diego Sexual Medicine. He's a sexual medicine expert, and he recently. And this is relevant to why I developed this this hot cold water metaphor. Yeah. He had a woman patient who, when she complained that she used to have normal orgasms, but now when her partner stimulates her, it becomes too intense too soon, and she has to stop. So this woman who had previously had normal orgasms said that now when her partner stimulates her, the intensity of the stimulation, it becomes too intense that she has to stop.
Oh, okay.
She can't take the genital stimulation because it's too intense.
Right.
So I said, how about giving her an SSRI, a short-acting SSRI? It's like Prozac, like an anti-depression. It's an antidepressant drug. As an inhibit, because it has, SSRIs, these selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, they are notorious for preventing people from having sexual response and orgasms. The people who take that don't like it because it ruins their
libido,
their libido and their ability to have sexual response and orgasm.
Right.
So I said, give her a low dose of it, and see, because you're adding a little bit of inhibition. So he tried that, and now she can have normal, more intense orgasms. She doesn't encounter that intense stimulation that prevents her from going on.
Right.
And similarly, in men who have premature ejaculation, by giving them low dose of SSRIs, of the same kind of drug, it prevents them from having it enables them to go have longer period of stimulation and more gradually increase to intensity, and then they have normal orgasms.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting.
And a longer latency, normal latency orgasms.
But Okay, so when you talk about like the solution of SSRIs as a pre-ejaculation problem, will it affect the how do I frame it? The strength or like the hardness of the penis when
it doesn't affect the strength of the erection.
Because it's sort of like trying to reduce the libido, right? And is it like directly related to?
Oh wait, are you under what condition? If people
are taking this SSRIs to cure the premature ejaculation, yeah,
it doesn't affect the erection.
Okay, got it. I just like
no, it doesn't affect that. It affects the sensation, not the actual erection itself.
Got it. I just like this came to my mind because it's the problem with the men, because that's the most important thing, and it's different with the female stimulation compared to the men stimulation. That's why like I asked this question, like if is it going to affect their libido in some sense? So
well, it's a low dose, so it doesn't affect the libido.
Okay,
it's a low dose. It adds a little bit of inhibition, but that little bit of inhibition enables them to go longer and generate more intense stimulation.
Right.
Okay. Without it becoming aversive.
Yeah. All right. So like I got like really good understanding of how exactly this works from the sciencey perspective, and I really want to get into the questions which I think normal people ask, but they don't have any facts around that, and they don't study a lot about all these things. Firstly, like I really want to know from the sociology perspective, you have been working in this field for a long time, right? So considering the taboo, because I come from a country where this is like one of the biggest taboo, even though like we have a rich culture and rich like Kama Sutra comes from India.
Yeah.
So like did you face some sort of taboo when you were working with this? Because you mentioned that people go out of the class when you just start talking about sex. Like, can you talk about that and how exactly you came into this and thought of, okay, I want to like research about this thing.
Actually, what happened was that when I first I was working at the I was a new assistant professor here in the Institute of Animal Behavior. We had an Institute of Animal Behavior at Rutgers, Newark. That's where I got my doctorate, and then I came back onto the faculty of the same institute. And when I was ready to see what happened, and this gets into how I got into the field. So let me answer that question. Yeah. The kind of obstacles I ran into.
Yeah, like taboo-ness.
By telling you how I got into the field and then what happened along the way. Actually, it started when I was an undergraduate. I was at City College, and Danny Lehrman was a professor at Rutgers, and he was a visiting professor at City College. I went to City College in New York, and he gave a course called The Structure and Function of the Organism. Okay. And I took his course, and I loved the course. It was, I didn't even have to take notes because everything went in and stuck. It was one of those courses where, I just could understand exactly what he's talking about. And then one day he gave a lecture on some work that people had done recently of putting crystals of hormone, of estrogen, in a tube, implanted a small crystal of estrogen into the brain, in the hypothalamus, in cats and in rats, and they stimulated sex behavior. Oh. And I went up to him after the class, and I said, that's really interesting. How could just a crystal of estrogen in one place in the brain trigger the whole sexual behavior, complex behavior? He said, well, yeah, that's a good question. How would you like to do that kind of thing for your dissertation, for your doctoral dissertation with me? And that was an offer I couldn't refuse. So I went from City College, I graduated, and I went to do my doctorate here. He had founded the Institute of Animal Behavior here at Rutgers, Newark. And he was working in doves. And at one point we had like 2,000 doves in a dove colony, about 2,000 doves, ring doves. And so I did a study of implanting crystals of hormone, and I actually did affect their sex behavior, their actually incubation on eggs, the reproductive behavior like that. So I convinced myself that, yeah, really, put a crystal of hormone in the brain, it really can trigger the whole behavior pattern. And then, so I did that for my doctorate, and then I wanted to know, what is the hormone doing to the neurons? And there was only one person doing that. That was Charles Sawyer at UCLA. So I did a postdoc with him because I wanted to measure neuron activity and how hormones can influence it. And so, you go into a lab and they're working on some project. So you get involved in the project just to learn the ropes, and then you can design your own experiment. But you learn the methodology, because it's a completely new methodology of recording neural activity. I never didn't do that. So he was studying a phenomenon called the pseudo-pregnancy reflex.
What's that?
A pseudo-pregnancy reflex is that. If there's a sterile mating in rats, if the male is sterilized, like a vasectomy in the male rat, so he's sterile, the mating stimulus itself triggers the female to stimulate the hormone, to release the hormones of pregnancy. So she becomes, she goes into a state, she stops the reproductive cycle, and she goes into a state where she actually can develop placentas, but there's no embryo. And it's called pseudo-pregnancy.
Oh, okay,
not real pregnancy, but it's a brain, a neural stimulation that activates the hormones. It's a neuroendocrine reflex. And it was a very exciting field at the time, just developing how the nervous system can control hormone secretion, how hormones can control the nervous system to change behavior. It's this reciprocal thing. So that's what he was studying. So I worked on that, but these were with anesthetized rats. We were looking at brain activity in response to a mimic of the mating stimulus, which is vaginal stimulation, using a glass rod. Excuse me. So that's how pseudo-pregnancy can be elicited by a glass rod mimicking the mating stimulus, the vaginal stimulation of mating. It could be a sterile male, or it can be mimicked with a glass rod. We were doing neural recording, finding where the brain responds to the vaginal stimulation and this kind of thing in anesthetized rats. And then when I got back to my own lab, I also learned the method of how to record the activity of neurons in awake animals. Moving around with. So I tried doing that stimulation in my own lab, again, continuing the study. And as soon as I did the vaginal stimulation, to my surprise, the rats became immobilized. They wouldn't move, and I could push against the cervix, and they would just slide along the table like that without running away from it. They were free to walk away, but they would just stand like that, and without moving.
They basically became numb.
Well, I don't know. They were unresponsive.
Okay.
So I said, "What happens if I pinch a foot?" And normally, if you pinch a foot of a rat, it goes like that.
Yeah.
When they're going like this, I pinch the foot. Nothing, no response. They didn't pull. They didn't withdraw the leg. They didn't squeak either. And I said, "Well, are they paralyzed? Are they immobilized? Is it a motor block, or are they not feeling the pain, or both?" And so I did a series of brain recordings in which I found that if I recorded it in neurons in the sensory part of the brain, sensory thalamus, that normally those neurons could respond to a pinch or to just brushing the fur, a touch or pinch. The same neuron responds to both stimuli.
Okay.
And then if I did the vaginal stimulation and repeated the stimulation, they continued to respond normally to the touch, but they didn't respond to the pain anymore.
Oh.
So I said, this is really strange, because I'd expect if it's just inhibiting these neurons, I would expect it to not respond to the weak stimulus, but still maybe respond to the strong stimulus. But that's not what happened. They didn't respond to the strong stimulus anymore, but they did respond to the weak stimulus.
Yeah.
So it means there are two different kinds of inputs to those neurons. And it means that the pain is being blocked.
Oh.
And I did a number of studies like that to convince myself that the pain from the vaginal stimulation is blocking the response to pain in the rats. And then it came to me, I came to the point where I said, I have all this fancy equipment, but it's only circumstantial evidence that the pain is being blocked. I mean, I have this evidence. I published those kinds of papers. And I said, the only way I'm going to know for sure if the pain is blocked is by asking women. And, get a subjective report. Does vaginal stimulation block your pain? That would be the most scientific answer.
So did it come to your mind, like, isn't it going to be like a taboo?
The only way I'm going to know for sure if vaginal stimulation blocks pain is if I ask women.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just a lot of data and neuro recordings, but I don't know for sure.
Right.
But if a woman says the pain is blocked, then well, that's right.
Yeah.
So that dawned on me, and I said, okay, well, now I have to. Is it possible to do this kind of study in humans, in women? So I decided that, first of all, if I want to do that study, I'm going to have to get IRB approval.
Like a proper approval.
That's the Institutional Review Board for the Protection of Human Subjects in Research.
Oh, okay.
That's what it stands for. And it's every university, we have an IRB board, a panel. It's in New Brunswick, and you have to say what the study is that you want to do, and and write a consent form and all that. And it has to be approved, the ethics of the study. And nobody in the campus had ever done any human research.
Oh, okay. You were the first one to do it.
And I wanted to do it on vaginal stimulation. I said, I figured that I better try a human study first and just see what, because nobody knew how to apply to do human study. Nobody knew how to apply to the IRB because there was nobody here. Yeah. So I asked my colleague at another university as a sample of how he phrased the thing, and I filled out the form, but I decided to do a very innocuous experiment, not having nothing to do with sex or anything, just a little human study that of EEG and finger tremor, that kind of thing, completely innocuous study. And so I submitted that as my trial to see if I can get an IRB approval at all. And they said, well, I got approved for it, and they said, please join the IRB panel because there's nobody on Newark representing. We want to have a representation on the panel. So I said, okay, I'd be happy to. That was my chance, and I figured I'm going to be really tough and develop a reputation for being very, very strongly ethical on the committee, and then I'll wait a while, and then I'll put in my application for doing sex research. So I did that for a year. I was on the panel and reviewing applications. I remember one application. I was really tough. It was a study that a New Brunswick study. They proposed. They said that the hypothesis was that newborn babies, evolutionarily, newborn babies should be able to swim.
Yeah. This is a like very common thing. Like I see it on Instagram and like Google that people talk about like infants swimming in the swimming pool if you put them.
Oh yeah. Well, but at the time, nobody had ever done that. This was a new thing, and I said, well, I don't know.
And was it approved?
It was a tough. That was a. I said, they need some more safeguards. They wanted to throw newborn neonates, newborn babies into the Rutgers pool and see, with their mothers there and see if they could swim. And I said, I think we always have to deal with the IRB. You have to deal with is the benefit to risk ratio. What's is benefit good enough for the risk? And they hadn't made a convincing case that the risk to benefit ratio. So I turned that one down, and so I got a reputation for being a tough guy. And then I put in my application to do this study, and they approved it.
Okay.
They approved it.
Okay, got it.
So then, and it happened by chance that I went to a conference on World Sexology conference, and I was invited to that. And somebody was talking about Beverly Whipple, who had published a book called The G-Spot, where she found a particularly sensitive area of the vagina, and I thought that was interesting. And somebody was talking about that, and then I when I came back to my lab, I had a letter. This was before email. I had a letter from Beverly Whipple because she had heard about my studies in rats of pain blockage, and she was doing she was studying the vaginal stimulation in the women for the G-Spot book that she wrote, and she was co-author, and I was giving a course in human sexuality at the time, and I invited her to give a seminar at the course. Because she was in South Jersey in Gloucester College. She's a nurse, and she was at the nursing faculty, and so she came. She came to Newark for it was an evening course, and she came with a bodyguard.
Okay.
Okay. But she gave an interesting seminar on her work with the G-Spot, and then she said,
with a bodyguard is like
with a bodyguard, and she said. That she knew about my research, and she said that she's a nurse, and she never really had any formal. She wrote that book, but she never had any formal research training, and she wants to get research training. She wanted to get a PhD. So I said, okay, listen, why don't you come and do a PhD here with me, and we'll do this study if vaginal self-stimulation blocks pain in women. And she said, okay. So I went to the faculty and say, Beverly Whipple, because she was already a media star from the book, and they said that the admissions committee, our psychology department admissions committee, said no way, because it's gonna be a circus. If she comes here, people are gonna be, it'll be all this, the press and all this, interfering with our work. But nevertheless, I said no. She's really serious, and she's a serious person, and she applied, and she came for an interview, and she convinced them that she's serious. She really wants to do this. So they said, well, okay, and then when we got approved to do the project, there was a delegation of faculty from the department, from the Institute of Animal Behavior, who went to the director, because I was in the department, in the Institute of Animal Behavior, and they went to him and said, "We don't want Beverly Whipple here because this is going to ruin the reputation of the Institute of Animal Behavior. We have an international reputation, and it's going to ruin the reputation to human research here, because it's known for animal research."
Yeah.
Which was, I mean, they really said that.
That was, I don't think that was the reason. Like they were just.
And Jay Rosenblatt, who was the director of the Institute at the time, because Daniel Lehman had died, said, "No, Barry has academic freedom. He has academic freedom to do this. You can't stop him." And he defended me. He protected me, and we proceeded to do the study. Yeah, and
so the circus was done before the study was started. Like just people talking about if you should do this or not. So I think mainly the reason, because as you said, like it's because of the stigma and the social taboo around this topic, and I think that was the main reason. Not
it was a social taboo, and it was also, they thought that Beverly was going to be wasn't going to be a serious student. Actually, she turned out to be an extremely serious student, working very, very hard, and really impressive. She impressed everybody, and I mean, she's a very smart person. And she actually, after she got her doctorate, she got appointed to the nursing school. She was a faculty. She was a professor she became a professor in the Newark School of Nursing, and we continued collaborating for many years after that. And then she retired.
So I think that's okay. So let's get on the practical part of the questions because I completed a book, The Orgasm Answer Guide, and that was like really interesting. And the questions which, like the way you wrote the book, and like I think you were a co-author on that book, right?
Yeah, I was the first author.
Yeah, exactly. So like when you wrote those pointers and like the questions which people have, like it was so articulative in nature. So it was not very difficult for me to come up with good questions, because you already put out the questions in the book. And I just want to like go in.
Sure.
Like we'll just go quickly over all the questions. It's a lot of questions, so just let's get on into that. So firstly, like I just want to know, just like first talking about the women orgasm and anatomically how exactly they are, like the orgasm happens. Like we have cervix, we have G-spot, we have clitoris. So firstly, like what is the different kind of stimulation which happens with all these three parts, and which has the massive or the maximum stimulation, and what is, like based on the studies, what women usually like prefer more compared to these three, and how exactly this works?
We've studied clitoral stimulation, vaginal stimulation, and cervical stimulation, and women can have orgasms from any of those, from stimulation of any of those regions, and what we found when we mapped the response in the sensory cortex to these different stimuli, we find that they all go to the same general region of the sensory cortex, where the genitals are mapped. In men and women, it's the same region, but they each one has a slightly different cluster of neurons that they activate, but each one is capable of inducing orgasm. The quality of the orgasms that women describe from clitoral stimulation is that it's external and relatively localized to the clitoral to the genital region. Okay. But when they do vaginal, when they stimulate the vagina to elicit an orgasm, then the orgasm feels much deeper inside, and it activates more the whole body. And when they have an orgasm from cervical stimulation, then it has a very, very abstract kind of feeling that they described it as expansive, universal,
cosmic sort of,
a
like,
cosmic feeling, cosmic reality, and these very abstract terms. And it was interesting that you remember when I mentioned about being able to think. The women could think of the clitoris, and it activated the sensory cortex in the same region, and they could think of the vaginal stimulation and activated the same region. But they couldn't think of the cervical stimulation. I mean, when they thought of cervical stimulation, it didn't activate it. So it's like, that's really inaccessible.
Right.
Because it's a question of what the familiarity is with the stimulation. The external women contact the clitoris all the time. In urinating and drying themselves and washing and all that. It's less, but they also experience vaginal stimulation not as frequently, and cervical even less frequently. So it's part of it is a question of the familiarity. Another is the fact that they're different nerves. Different nerves carry sensation from the clitoris. It's the pudendal nerve, and the vaginal is a pelvic nerve, and the cervix is the hypogastric nerve. They're different. They're different nerves, and they project to slightly different places in the brain, and they have different qualities, different thresholds. It's easy to stimulate the pudendal nerve. As you say, there are a recent study by a colleague of mine who calculated 10,000 nerve endings in the clitoris, the most densely innervated part of the body in men and women.
So it's easier to stimulate that part compared to the other two parts.
So stimulating that, it's probably easiest to stimulate. Has the lowest threshold, and it may have the most nerve fibers. Of the pudendal may have more nerve fibers than the pelvic or the hypogastric nerve from the genitals. That kind of analysis has not been done, but it's a possibility. So, and that could account for the first of all, the pudendal nerve for the clitoris. That's an external organ, largely. I mean, of course, there's an internal component to the clitoris, the crura and the bulbs, but the pelvic nerve for the vagina and the hypogastric nerve for the cervix, those are internal visceral nerves. So there are different qualities of internal stimulation versus external stimulation. So the fact that the vaginal stimulation produced orgasms produces a internal and whole body reaction as opposed to the clitoral that produces just an external, more limited. There are different qualities to those neurons. But what it implies, and the fact that they all go to the same cluster of regions in the sensory cortex, but in different places, means that if you stimulate all three of those regions, you're stimulating a larger population of neurons, each of which population is capable of inducing orgasm. So women who say that they stimulate, if they stimulate clitoris, vagina, and cervix, they say their orgasms are much more intense and more complex and much more pleasurable than stimulating any one alone. Actually, there was a study that calculated to get to your question, what percentage of orgasms are produced by stimulation of clitoris or vagina or cervix, and it's about roughly 2/3 of the women say it's 1/3, 2/3, 1/3 of the women say that the cervical stimulation contributes to their orgasm. 2/3 of the women say that the vagina contributes to the orgasm. And all the women say that clitoris stimulation contributes to their orgasm. So that's a rough estimation of. So it's much more likely. I don't know if you or the listeners drive a stick shift car, a manual transmission, but where you start in first gear, and then you pick up momentum, and then you shift into second gear, and then you shift into third. It's a torque. How hard does the engine have to work? The push. So as you pick up speed and momentum, you shift into a higher gear, which the engine doesn't go as fast, but but you can get much more speed out of it, because you go from first gear to second gear. You start with a very large gear, and the motor is going fast, and you get going, and then once you get going, you shift into a second gear where the motor isn't going as fast, but you're going fast, and a lower gear until you go all the way to 6 gears. You can go all the way that way.
Right.
Clitoral stimulation is like starting in first gear. It's easiest to get going. And then you shift into second gear. Now it's possible to start a car if you play the clutch right with a manual transmission. It's possible to start in third gear or even fourth gear. Almost impossible in fifth gear and sixth gear. To get going. So it's possible that clitoral stimulation is like first gear, and vaginal stimulation is like third gear, and cervical stimulation is like sixth gear. So you start out easy with the clitoral stimulation, and then you start the vaginal stimulation, and you're building up momentum and speed. And then you go to the cervical stimulation, and you're going 100 miles an hour. That it's that kind of thing. Even so, I use that as an analogy but people don't understand that, because everybody has automatic transmission now. Can't even get a Honda with except the Sport. You can't even get a Honda with my previous cars have manual transmission Hondas, but the Accord, you can't get them anymore.
That's completely opposite in India. Like in India, we have most of the cars as manual. I think we have manual.
So people in India
they
will
might understand this analogy.
Okay.
But because you mentioned about the stat like of 1/3 and that 2/3 thing, because I was listening to this podcast, and I think you have also done a podcast with her, Dr. Ina Malik, and and she was on the Andrew Huberman Labs podcast, and she was talking about the same thing. Like most of the women get stimulus with clitoris, and they end with the clitoris stimulation more compared to like the vaginal and the other cervix stimulation, and it's very less women who get like at the end of the orgasm. It's just with the vaginal. It's most of the women just wants clitoris stimulation at the end of a orgasm. That is something like somewhere around she was talking about, how women get orgasm. I'm not sure like if it was the same thing. So can you tell me about this?
Well, I'm not sure I understand completely what you're saying, but is it that they start with clitoral stimulation and then go to vaginal stimulation?
But they usually end with the clitoris and vaginal both. Like most of the women
end with both.
They want.
Well, I mean, it's you're getting the system going. In order to get the recruitment started of the neurons, you start with the lowest threshold. Neurons. I mean, the clitoris has the most nerve endings, the most fibers, so you get those activated, and that makes it easier to activate the higher threshold vaginal neurons. But they have more. Just go back to the fact of the vaginal. When I did the probing of the rat, the fact that the rat was completely immobilized, front legs, back legs, pinch, and the head, even the head, if I would pinch any part of the body, there would show virtually no response to any part of the body from the vaginal stimulation, vaginal and cervical stimulation, because I'm pushing against the cervix and stretching the vagina. So that means that there's a very widespread effect of the inhibition all over the body from the vaginal and cervical stimulation. And that doesn't occur with the clitoral stimulation. It doesn't have that hard-wiring contact projection to the entire body. So there's something special about the vaginal and cervical stimulation that affects the whole body. And that's why the women describe a whole body response to vaginal and cervical stimulation, which is not, they don't explain, they don't describe that to clitoral stimulation.
That's true. Yeah, I get this.
I think it's a hardwired phenomenon. You know, that's the way the nervous system and the body are designed.
Right. And so, is there any difference between like self-stimulation and versus stimulation with the partner? Because I think when we talked about the transmission of like this neurons and stuff in the beginning, it seems like it doesn't make any difference like if there's a partner or involved or not. So
we compared. Nan Wise was my student. We did a study of orgasm in women, comparing orgasm, self-stimulation induced orgasm with partner-induced orgasm. And we had their partner standing outside the scanner stimulating their clitoris, or they stimulated themselves. And we didn't see any significant difference in the orgasm. The only difference we saw in the two different ways that the orgasm was stimulated was it took longer for the women to have an orgasm with the partner than with the self-stimulation. But in terms of brain activity, there was no significant difference in the regions that were activated. But of course, you know, psychologically, there's, you know, certainly with a loving partner, there are many other factors that come in that can interact with the physiology of the orgasm.
Right. And I think that psychological part may be related to the arousal part more rather than the orgasm, because orgasm is something which is happening in your brain, and arousal is something which is happening. Arousal happens when you have that kind of psychological surrounding or physiological surrounding around you, and your partner is there with you, and it's basically leading to that arousal part, which eventually is going to be like orgasm. I think maybe that's one of the reasons.
Well, arousal is the tricky term, so you have to be careful about what you know. It's like stress, which can be aversive or good stress or bad stress. So these terms people throw them around very loosely. You know, some people say, some women think use the term, and not only women but therapists use the term arousal to mean engorgement, a clitoral engorgement. Or penile erection. And other people, and lubrication, they call that arousal. You know, if they lubricate and if they get engorged clitoris, you know, the blood fills the clitoris, they call that arousal. But other people, when they say arousal, I mean a psychological awakening and high libido. That's arousal.
Yeah, that's kind of
so. And there's a lot of confusion about that because they're two different processes. And people don't make a distinction, even in the literature. It gets very, very confusing. I mean, there's the arousal process to produce the orgasm, but then there's the arousal of the libido and the fantasizing about the whole situation and all that. So there are different aspects, and certainly if you're doing it with someone you love, it's much better than if you're doing it with somebody who you don't. and or something like that. There are all kinds of factors, so many factors.
So it's like some sort of a practical question I have. Like when we talk about the libido-based arousal, like when person, when you are with your loving partner and everything. So is there any relationship between like having a foreplay or like having some sort of connection between the partners eventually leading to a better orgasmic feeling or like better intensity of
course,
orgasm?
yeah, of course.
Yeah, because people usually don't know about it, and they usually aim for the penetrative sex more often rather than focusing on the.
Well, okay, I think in terms of optimizing the orgasm, yeah, I mean, if you start with penetrative sex, it's like trying to start in the third or fourth gear.
Yeah.
And the man can ejaculate while the car is just picking, it's still going at 5 miles an hour in third gear.
Yeah.
So and then he's finished, and that leaves the woman feeling abandoned and frustrated, and congested,
right,
and very, very uncomfortable. So really, it's better to start with the foreplay and get the car going.
Get the car going, yeah.
And then have the penetrative sex.
Exactly.
Now, in addition, I wanted to bring up one other thing that I hadn't mentioned before. That when we were doing the mapping on the sensory cortex of the clitoris and the vagina and the cervix, we had the women do just as controls. Again, controls, doing other parts, stimulating other parts, self-stimulating the fingers, or the face, or the nipple. We had them do nipple self-stimulation. And what we found very surprising was that the nipple self-stimulation, activated the very same group of neurons that were activated by the genital self-stimulation.
Oh, okay.
And so I told my male neuroscience colleagues that this is an exception to the map, the classical body map, that the nipple is supposed to be on the chest area of the map. And in fact, we found the nipple stimulation did activate chest area, but we found that it also activated the genital area. So my male neuroscience colleagues were very surprised at that. And when I told my female neuroscience colleagues, they said, yeah. Because many women report that nipple stimulation, it feels very erotic.
Yeah, it's like more common among females, and that's why the men doesn't know.
We found also when we mapped the genital system in men, the same comparable kind of stimulation. We found that the nipple stimulation in men also does the same thing, activates the same genital sensory cortex.
But it's very common compared to the female counterpart?
Well, in the men, we got significant results in the men we studied.
Oh.
We studied 19 men.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I personally sometimes think that men are less blessed compared to women in these kind of stats. But when we talk about this and when you read stats, it come out to be the same as women neurons, they also have the similar kind of neurons which men have, and it's very same in both the
and we've compared actually right now we're doing we've done orgasms in women. We've studied where in the brain orgasms occur in women, where in the brain orgasms occur in men. And it looks like, just looking at it, looks like the similarities are greater than the differences. One big difference is that there's more inhibition after orgasm in men, or maybe even during orgasm, that the inhibition is stronger in men than in women.
Okay.
And that may account for why there's a refractory period in men where they have difficulty having another orgasm, but women can go on to have multiple orgasms because maybe the inhibition is not as strong in the women.
Right.
But the orgasm itself, the regions of the orgasm itself, not after, but during, the similarity is much greater than the differences. But we're doing a head-to-head comparison,
Right.
directly comparing what regions are subtracting one from the other, what regions are different, and also what regions are the same. There are formal ways of
Right.
doing that comparison. We're doing that right now.
And like coming up to the multiple orgasms part, like when you studied about this, like does every woman have multiple orgasms, or it's like, like proportion based, like some women
It's
might have.
proportional. Not every woman,
Can have, right?
but and not every woman not every woman who does have multiple orgasms has it each time.
Right.
And we actually have we published a paper on a male who claimed he could have multiple orgasms.
Yeah, I read about that. Yeah.
And he had, and we asked, ejaculatory orgasms, and we asked him to show us. So he brought his own films and everything, but he had six separate, collected, in six different plastic cups. In a half hour, he did indeed have 6 orgasms.
Oh, that's
each one with an ejaculation.
Yeah, it might be a world record. So so you never know.
So some men do have multiple orgasms.
Yeah, but it's like more common among women compared to
and also
men.
it depends on the level of arousal.
Yeah.
With a particular individual,
right.
I myself have had multiple orgasms with a very desirable partner, very loving partner.
And like why men tends to become like drowsy or sleepy after an orgasm?
Well, that's another question, and that brings up a pathology that is receiving a lot of interest now, but no answers. It's called post-orgasmic illness syndrome, POIS.
Okay.
And it's mainly reported in men, but it's also there are some reports in women. And this is a strange phenomenon where immediately after the orgasm, the men feel the men and women feel like they're sick, like they have a flu. And they're achy, and there's general malaise, feeling bad, and headachy, and with they call it brain fog. And it can last for hours or days.
Right.
And there are a lot of hypotheses about it, but no good answers. Like, is it maybe allergic reaction or autoimmune reaction or prolonged other parasympathetic dominance? Nobody really knows.
But because it doesn't make sense, because if it's the reason, like people say that because basically they're burning calories and like they're burning energy after, like, while having sex, and after that they become like lethargic. But this doesn't make sense because
it's not just the burning out of it's not just an exhaustion. It's an active inhibition.
Yeah, exactly.
There's active inhibition going on. We see that. We see that in our study of orgasm in men, that the inhibition that they're applying the stimulation, the genital stimulation, during the orgasm, and at the same time, the overall activity in the brain while they're stimulating, the overall activity of the brain is going down.
Right.
It starts out it peaks at orgasm, and they continue the stimulation, and the activity goes down while they're stimulating. And that means that there's active inhibition going on.
So they never
and
researched
that doesn't happen. We haven't seen that in women.
Okay. All right. Yeah, because this is like more common among like men, as per se, like when it comes about
the
most common problems which men face. I just want to like talk about the best practical questions which people can get help from this podcast also. So like the most common problems among men are like erectile dysfunction or like premature ejaculation. These are like 2 common problems which people face. Like why does it happen, and what are the like solutions for this?
Well, there could be psychological aspects to it. Very powerful influence. The psychological influences can be very powerful on libido and desire, and so that should not be dismissed by any means. But there are also, in the case of erectile dysfunction, it's actually an early warning sign for arteriosclerosis, where the fat accumulation, lipid accumulation in the blood vessels starts constricting the blood vessels, and it reduces the blood flow to the penis. And the penis is a particular, it's a particularly obvious if there's that general buildup of arteriosclerosis.
Right.
We're less aware of it in other parts of the body, but it becomes it's the earliest sign can occur in the penis.
Right. People with like high cholesterol and
high cholesterol. Well, yeah, the high cholesterol and accumulation of lipids in the blood vessels.
Right. And so this can be like the normal cure can be like having a good lifestyle, like working out, exercising, and all these things, right?
Well, it helps because that I don't know about erectile dysfunction, but strong muscles increase the pleasure of orgasm.
Oh, okay.
Because muscle contraction is so crucial to orgasm. For example, women who do Kegel exercises, they're doing the Kegel exercises, which is contracting the pelvic floor muscles, like to stop urination. Contracting those muscles to prevent yourself from expressing urine. When women do those, women who start out having problem with stress urinary incontinence, where they express urine when they laugh or sneeze or something, and the therapy is to build up the strength of the pelvic floor muscles by doing those contractions. Practice stop as if you're stopping urine flow, contracting the pelvic floor muscles that way. When they build up that strength to control the urination, they say their orgasms are much stronger now.
Oh.
Because those muscles contract during orgasm, and it gives a significant part of the pleasure of the orgasm.
Right. So and what a man can do, like for the
same thing.
Okay.
Or build up
pelvic floor muscle.
All muscles.
Okay.
Because the orgasm is contraction of muscles all over the body. General myotonia, increased muscle tone.
Right.
And the stronger the muscles are, the more intense is the contraction, and the more intense the contraction is, the more sensory input is generated from the muscle contraction, and the more pleasurable it is.
Okay. Yeah, because I think this is something which I realized later on. I had a coccyx problem with me, like earlier part of my life, because I had some sort of like ligament tear somewhere in the tail area, and like the physiotherapist suggested this kind of same exercise. So I didn't realize that time like this is very similar to the pelvic floor muscle.
It is the same thing. It's the same.
Yeah. So this now, like after talking to you, I just realized that this is the thing. Also, like one last thing with the men counterpart is like, how can a man what are the strategies which men can do to avoid premature ejaculation? As per like one thing which you mentioned was like taking SREIs, medicine, antidepressant things. What are the like practical methods?
Low dose.
Yeah. So what are the other?
I don't know of. Distraction.
Okay.
Psychological distraction is one thing. But I don't know what other strategies. I guess any kind of anything that would have an inhibitory effect. I don't want to recommend anything, but any kind of inhibitory substances, like alcohol, it might have an inhibitory effect. It was something to try. It might work in the opposite direction, but it could have an inhibitory effect. If and that might slow it down. I don't know.
I have just like really two good questions which I read in your book also. So firstly, like, which is the most common asked question among youngsters, that does a penis size affect the like basically orgasm, or is that like a myth among people? People have discussed about this thing a lot, and you also talked about that in your
Does
book.
penis size affect the orgasm in men or in women?
In women, like does size matters? This is the question.
Well, it depends. The answer is it depends.
Okay.
It depends on the man. It depends on the woman. The women's vaginas are of different lengths. The diameter, the relative diameter is of different lengths.
Right.
There's vaginal stimulation can block pain, but vaginal stimulation can also be painful, depending on the rate, the relative strength of the inhibition and sensitivity, and there are many factors.
Right.
I don't think there's a
perfect answer for this.
A perfect answer. There's no simple answer to it. It's women who have given birth, the vagina is larger, and that can reduce the intensity of the stimulation that she perceives. And there's a lot of procedures now that are being done. They call it, for older women, they call it vaginal rejuvenation.
Okay.
Where they actually, and also for men, of actually producing damage, intentionally producing relatively mild damage to the tissues by various means, by lasers or shockwave therapy, to damage the tissue and then stimulate it to regenerate. And the regeneration is more than what it was to begin with.
Right.
And there are a lot of companies making all these kinds of devices with all kinds of different lasers of damaging more superficial or deeper tissue, superficial tissue or deeper tissue or still deeper tissue, and all different ideas. And does it recover nerve endings? That's an open question, and all kinds of, and they're injecting stem cells. So there are all different procedures now being used to try to compensate for different size, different relative sizes. In terms of, so the question is, it's a combination of the male and the female.
Right. Like it's like what is more compatible, like it's like compatibility test, and whoever is more compatible, it will just.
I mean, if the input is too much for the I mean, if the penis is too big for the vagina, it could be aversive.
Yep.
If the vagina is too big for the penis, it doesn't get the sense of the stimulation. So in that sense, it's you can say size matters, but there are various ways of getting around that by using other vibration and other stimulators and all kinds of. Right. There's a whole industry on that. That's a whole book by itself.
That's true. Like when we talk about all these people who are talking about, like I have listened to a lot of podcasts who talk about all these things. Yeah. Like how to have better, and like that's a whole different thing. I have really few last questions, really good questions, which is thought provoking sometimes when I think about it. Firstly, have you seen, can you extrapolate this thing out of how porn affects basically having a good sexual life and orgasms? like in the recent times compared to the earlier times, the accessibility towards porn is more like it's easily accessible. Is it affecting like people's sexual life right nowadays more compared to the previous times? Like, do you see any sort of like data and?
Well, that's not my area.
Okay.
You know, I don't deal with that kind of those issues. I'm not a clinician.
Okay.
And you know, I can see it going both ways. That that it can stimulate stimulate interest and give ideas for different positions.
Yeah.
You know, it can have this kind of creativity, this creative kind of thing. On the other hand, it's not really encouraging affection. It's encouraging performance, but and you need performance, but also you need the loving caresses and that kind of communication between partners has a tremendous impact on the quality of the sexual experience and orgasm. So, and that's missing in porn, and you know, it's the porn is like the mechanics. It's the mechanics of it without all the psychological aspects surrounding it. So it's you know, it's like fire, or you know, it's how you use it. It can be abused. I mean, it's like many things. Like
people have like fake expectations from seeing these unreal things.
Fake expectations. Yeah, all these things, and you know, it could lead to lack. If there's no communication, it can lead to resentment. That, you know, if you think if you think that this is the way that you're supposed, if a man thinks that this is the way you're supposed to act, or women think that this is the way you're supposed to act. That it can counteract experimentation between two people.
Okay.
So, you know, it's a double-edged sword. It can you know, fire. You can, if you use it right, it's crucial. But if you can abuse it, and it can be damaging.
Right.
So I think just the idea, just the accessibility of pornography is it opens up sexuality, takes it out of the
taboo form and
taboo.
Yeah.
And it's more open, but it can lead to abuse or not.
Yeah. And I had like whole debate about this thing, like being pornography being like a main culprit behind all the rapes and all these like things which are going on. It's like a whole different debate. Like people have both the perspectives of it, but yeah, it can be a problem when it comes to all these like, you know, abuse which happens around us. So yeah,
it can be abusive. It can be you know, making assumptions about the appropriate activity of the male as opposed to the female.
Yeah.
And that can lead to resentment, or you know, it's so complex.
Yeah.
It's hard to generalize about what is pornography good or bad.
Yeah.
There are good aspects and bad aspects, I think.
Yeah. And like maybe I may be wrong about this thing, but I personally feel that when it comes to pornography, it creates that disparity of you know, the power dynamics between a male and a female. Like it portrays male as a more dominant figure, and that sexual dance which should happen between a partner and a couple it's eliminated from the pornography.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to say. Yeah, I agree with that.
Oh, that's true.
And that can, if the woman wants to be dominant, and the male, has seen all this porn, and that could be he could resent it, or she could resent it.
Yeah.
If you assume that there are certain positions you're supposed to take, if you're supposed to do this or supposed to do that, or this is supposed to happen or that's supposed to happen, that can screw the whole thing.
Right. And all these things comes from the porn, which is not like a legit source.
And people can become addicted to that too.
Yeah,
to
exactly.
porn.
We also see all those
that's another problem.
cases.
And in preference to having a social interaction. Who needs social interaction when I have my little screen. So
and I think this is also happening through the dating apps right nowadays. And what do you think about this idea? Like, what's your opinion about this? Having like multiple partners and like casual relationships, does it affect the feeling of orgasm? Because I was listening to, again, like that podcast where Reena Malik was saying that, when people have sex for the first time, the male and the female counterpart, and they have observed that the male orgasms 90% of the time, but counterpart, the female part, they only orgasms like only 45 to 50% of the female orgasm when they're having like sex for the first time.
And you hardly ever see women having orgasms in pornography.
Exactly, yeah. That's like more fake, all these things. So do you think like having multiple partners affect this thing?
Different strokes for different folks.
Okay.
How can you say, how can you generalize about that?
Right.
Some people want that, and some people feel that they're being betrayed.
Because this idea comes from like most of the religions also, like having a monogamous relationship and all these things. Like I just thought like sometimes that is it some sort of like logic or like pragmatic way of them telling it into like a religion part and telling people that it's immoral to be with the multiple partners, or like there is some sort of scientific backing towards it, like having
there's no scientific backing to it.
Right.
I mean, it increases the probability of sexually transmitted disease, but there's no it's a personal. Right. It's very, very personal. Like you can't legislate it.
Okay. I just have one last question for you, and this is something which I was thinking on my own, and I didn't research about it in anything. And I read a lot of like philosophies, both like Western and the Eastern philosophies. So there has been like a lot of philosophers who talked about sex and orgasm as a way to enlightenment, and that was like one of the interesting concepts, and they were also criticized by most of the people who are like very religious kind of people, that how can you relate enlightenment with sex? Do you see any sort of like backing towards it? Because when we talk about orgasm and the feeling when we have that orgasm, our prefrontal cortex tends to become like quieter, and we come into like unthinkable.
Actually, we don't see that. I think that's a myth. It's been that idea of the prefrontal cortex gets deactivated during orgasm. It's not true. We see activation of the prefrontal cortex, and the reason that I think it's a mistake, but it got into the literature. I mean, you're quoting from the literature, and it's this is the group from Holland, Georgiadis and others. They didn't do functional MRI. We do functional MRI, which where you get a brain scan every 2 seconds, continuously. Right. So we see the whole brain activity every 2 seconds continuously. In the case of PET scan, which the Holland group uses PET scan, if you read the papers carefully, well, first of all, PET scan is completely different because I've done PET scans, and what PET scans use a radioactive oxygen to show where there's increased blood flow in the brain by measuring radioactive oxygen. But in order to do that, the way that's set up, this method that they use in PET scan, first, and I've done this, so I know you have to have a facility that has a cyclotron that creates radioactive oxygen from air. Then, so you have the radioactive oxygen, and then that's in one room. Then the oxygen gets pumped into the next room where it's a chemistry lab that synthesizes combines hydrogen with the oxygen, it makes radioactive water. And then the radioactive water, so it takes about 2 minutes to generate the radioactive oxygen in the cyclotron. Then it takes about 2 minutes to generate to synthesize the radioactive water. That's about 4 minutes. And then it takes about 2 minutes to pump from the chemistry lab of since the radioactive oxygen has a half-life of only 15 minutes. So that means it loses half its radioactive activity in 15 minutes. So that's 4 minutes. Then it gets pumped into a line, into an intravenous line of the person lying in the scanner, and that takes about 2 minutes. And then the radioactive water has to circulate in the body, and so it can accumulate in the brain in areas that are active. So that takes 7 minutes before you take a snapshot of the brain activity that you're interested in. So it took 7 minutes. So in order to do that, when you start out making the radioactive water, radioactive oxygen, you have to tell the person in the scanner, we want you to have an orgasm in about 7 minutes.
That's
okay.
Yeah.
And then you start the process, and the whole thing goes, and you take the snapshot, 7 minutes, regardless of what the condition is. So in the papers that the people say, that these authors say, they say, so we take the image of the brain activity around the time of orgasm.
Oh, so they're not like very sure about.
And we see a big drop-off in activity after orgasm. So it's very likely that they're
so biased.
We have a much more accurate measure of when orgasm occurs, because we have the people press a button when their orgasm starts, and then we every 2 seconds we have the data before we have the activity immediately before they press the button for the say 10 or 20 seconds before so they're highly aroused, but they haven't gone over into orgasm, and then when they press the button, we have the orgasm activity, and we can electronically subtract the high arousal just before orgasm from the activity, during orgasm, and that's how we get the brain regions that are specifically related to the orgasm as opposed to the high arousal that's not orgasm.
Right.
Get rid of all that. So that's how we did the map of the regions to compare with the pain regions.
Right.
So it's much more precise method than the other, and they claim that's where but they did that first in men before we did the men's study. We did the women's study first, and we never said that the brain shuts down at orgasm. They're making a big mistake.
Right. But as a metaphysical question, do you think like it can lead to enlightenment? Just as a metaphysical question.
Can orgasm lead to enlightenment? I think that what it can do is it can make one more aware of bodily activity. You become more. One of the problems with there's many diseases called psychosomatic diseases, where they're physical diseases such as hypertension and asthma, irritative bowel syndrome, ulcer, and there's a population of people who have those illnesses, who it's correlated with a condition called alexithymia, which the meaning of alexithymia is without words for feelings, and so people who don't have they don't have words for their feelings. They're not aware of their feelings. Those people have a tendency. There's a population of people like that who have a tendency to develop hypertension or asthma or ulcer or irritable bowel syndrome, or these psychosomatic diseases that are psychological based, but they're real physical diseases. And it's correlated with not being aware of the inner sensations from the body. So I can see where enlightenment would be where you, from the orgasms that is so bodily intense, that if you're aware of all those feelings, you're more aware. You're just more aware of your body, and we use our body to make us aware of the outside world. We just being more aware. So I can see where that could be a source of enlightenment. Just increasing awareness.
Like just getting the perception of the different reality, like some sort of some.
Well, it could be an altered state of reality. Some people, they go off into intense orgasms can be an altered state of reality. You merge with the other individual. You merge with your partner, and two hearts beating as one, and you lose your boundary. Because it feels good, and you're sharing it, and it's so exciting, and all this, and you change the perspective. You're not in the normal orthogonal world. You're in a different in a feeling world. Because I'm convinced that we have in psychology there's a concept of figure and ground, and you probably have seen that picture of is it a vase or is it two kissing faces? So you can look at it either way. One is the figure, one is the ground. So I'm convinced that the figure and ground, in terms of our bodily awareness, is our external awareness of the orthogonal world, left, right, up, and down, is one reality. The other reality is our feelings. There are two realities, and we normally go through life with the figure is the external world, and the ground is our feelings. But we can also shift that so our feelings can become the figure, and the external world is the ground. And we're focused on our feelings, which is not orthogonal. It's very different. So by having orgasms and having this altered state, we realize there's something else. There's another way of looking at things, of being aware. So sure, that can increase awareness in general.
Exactly. This is what exactly that philosopher which I was talking about referring to. So he was sort of a spiritual leader, and he was trying to communicate and tell people that how big important this thing is, because most of the religions look down upon sex and talking about sex, and I think that was very important conversation, and saying the same thing which you said in a more spiritual way. So I think I also agree with this thing. So this was the point I was just trying to get an understanding from you. So
people describe having those kinds of experiences with drugs, with marijuana or psychedelics. I think what that's doing is it's bringing out the the feeling, where the feeling world is the figure, and the outside world is
switching
the ground.
the reality basically.
It's a shift.
Yeah.
It's a flip of the inner versus the outer world, where we go through life mainly, in a workaday world, with the outside world being dominant, and our feelings are internal. But with the drugs, it flips it, and our feelings become the real. The predominant reality,
Right.
and the outside world is just
less perceptible.
is secondary.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's why this makes sense. So
And orgasms can help because there's such it's such a sentient, such a sentient, powerful awareness of body sensations that it forces us to make that transition, focusing on our feelings as opposed to the focusing on
external reality,
on the
which we
external
see,
reality.
Yeah.
And we lose, people, we don't hear things, we don't see other things, because we're focused on our feelings.
Right. And I think, so that's why I really like the Eastern philosophy. It's more on the non-pragmatic side compared to the Western philosophy. There's no distinction between that. They both have their own ways of thinking. But when it comes to being the observer, which you tell, when you can observe the reality beyond the present reality, you basically can transcend towards enlightenment, as the idea says.
You're perceiving the reality of your feelings as dominant over the reality of the external world.
Right.
And then suddenly you realize that there's a different reality. It's all the same reality, but it's just where the focus is.
Yeah.
Is it internal? Which is the figure, which is the ground?
Exactly, yeah. We just change the lens in the same existing.
The orgasm helps flip the figure to ground relation.
Yeah.
And I mean, after all, everything we perceive is a combination of those two things.
Yeah.
The internal and the external. That's everything.
Exactly, yeah. People with different basically upbringing, or different sort of they call it determinism, and when they explain the concept what exactly happens after what. So people have their own neuroplasticity of things, and they can observe the same thing with a different lens compared to someone else, however they are brought up in their own social society and their own environment. So it depends on people to people how they have different perspective on a particular thing. So exactly this is the point which makes sense in that particular part. So yeah, I think thank you so much for this conversation. And
I never thought of it in those terms, but in terms of orgasm producing enlightenment. But that I think it's perfectly plausible that it functions in that way of making us realize that there's a different reality, and that is enlightenment.
Right. Exactly. So I think this is a plausible. Maybe it can be a next research idea for you. Maybe in the similar type. You know what? Let's come. This can be your dissertation.
Try to get an IRB approval for that one.
Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Barry. And this was one of the really good conversation. I got to know about a new thing in depth. So that's rare to happen. And thank you so much for research.
You had great questions, and really I learned a lot. Just responding to your questions. I never thought of that.
Yeah. So I just have on the spot thinking whenever someone answers anything, I just think about just coming up with the own curiosity. That's the reason I started this podcast.
Yeah.
So just ask whatever is coming to my mind without any judgment and without any.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much again.
My pleasure. And anytime if you have come up with other questions, let me know.
Yeah. Sure. Definitely. Yeah. I'll just send you a mail or something to know more about things.
Yeah.
And I really like your opinion about this thing, and being an open mind to chase the curiosity. that's like very commendable, and that's why like you have come so far in your research area.
Well, you know, it's a crazy time in this country, and there's this crazy attitude against sex, and you know, official attitude about sex, and it's just we just have to just keep doing what we're doing, and keep, you know, don't let anybody stop us, and you know, this is important stuff.
Right.
It's really important for pleasure. Pleasure itself is a evolutionarily adaptive, necessary life maintaining process. Pleasure is not only good, pleasure is necessary.
Yep.
It's necessary for the existence of living matter.
Yeah.
It's what makes it because if it weren't pleasurable, then organisms would just sit there and die.
Exactly. Yeah. Like there's no
And
procreation.
Getting stimulation, getting pleasure, is what makes us live.
Yeah. Right.
It's not fluff. It's not fluff. It's essential. It's essential for the life, for neuron going down to the neurological level.
Yeah.
It's necessary for neurons to survive. They need stimulation.
Yeah, exactly.
And pleasurable stimulation.
And there's a like very interesting thing which I want to tell you, because I was talking to my mom yesterday, and I just told her that, and she's like typical Indian mom with a typical Indian mindset, right? And I told her that, you know, I'm doing this podcast on sex and knowing about like orgasms, all these things, and she was like, why are you talking about all this stuff? I was like, wait a minute. I just asked her one question, like, if right now I just ask you this, that in your 20s, you and my dad, like if you wanted yourself and my dad to know about all these things, like do you think you wanted that kind of thing when you were in your 20s?
Sure.
And she had like no answer to this. Like, I don't want to answer this, because inherently everyone wants their partner or like themselves to know about that stuff, but they are like, you know, because of the social stigmas, they're afraid to ask these questions in the surrounding, and that's very important that people should ask this question and know about this thing. It's very important part of life.
Yeah.
So.
And not only that, but you know, physiologically speaking, since what we're actually measuring in the functional MRI during orgasm is the amount of utilization of oxygen and nutrients by neurons in the brain. And we find that essentially all the systems in the brain are activated simultaneously during orgasm.
Right.
And that means that there's maximum blood flow carrying oxygen and nutrients to the neurons of our brain. So that has to be beneficial to the brain. It's like giving it a surge of energy. And I don't think have been any studies done on it, but it's very likely that just knowing from the mechanism, from what we're actually measuring physiologically, it's got to be good for the brain.
Right.
It could be forestalling Alzheimer's. It could be good for brain function.
Yeah.
For cognitive function. Having orgasms could be good for cognitive function.
Yeah, that's true. It can like maintain the brain activity which is happening in your mind, and it can like, you know, further
keep neurons alive.
Yeah,
Exactly. And give them oxygen and glucose, you know, the nutrients that they need. It's like a big you know, banquet for the brain.
Yeah. It's like a mechanical way to like stimulate and getting your neurons activated.
Yeah, it's a way of getting your neurons exercised.
Yeah, exactly.
It's good for cognition.
Yeah.
So
I think people should understand the need of this kind of information they have. But yeah, I think we have done our part to get this podcast out there and like for people to know about this.
It's even there's study on prostate cancer. There are a couple of studies on prostate cancer, and what they found was that they asked men in these two studies. One was in Greece. I can't remember where the other one was, and they had men with prostate cancer and asked them to remember in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s when they're in their age, because they were in their 60s, 70s with the prostate cancer. Estimate the number of orgasms, number of ejaculations they had in those years, and they found a correlation between the men who had prostate cancer having fewer ejaculations during those years, during fewer ejaculations per week or month than the men who didn't have cancer.
Oh, that's a interesting one.
In other words, it's good to get rid of the ejaculate.
Yeah.
It's beneficial to get rid of the ejaculate.
Yeah.
These are two studies on, cancer studies.
Right. And I think that's the other side of a diaspora, which talks about, I don't know if you have heard about this, no fap and celibacy. Like Indian culture talks about
no what?
No fap, like no masturbation, because like a semen retention, all these kind of things, and celibacy is very popular in Indian culture. I don't know, they say that when you retain your semen, it has a lot of nutrition and it can help you like perform better in your life, better focus and all these things. So a lot of scientists have like disproved these kind of.
I don't think so.
Really?
Yeah. No. Well, I mean, here are two studies.
Yeah, exactly.
That go against that reasoning.
So right now you're just destroying a lot of careers of self-help gurus.
Well, I don't know. There isn't any research on it. It's just a problem. Sex is so dirty that you can't get research grants for it. So there's so much we don't know about in sex research.
Yeah. I think it's most of the Indian scriptures which talks about celibacy and semen retention, and I don't know any sort of like backing, but like how religion and scriptures work. So people just use that source as a legitimate source and tell people to not fap or not masturbate so that they can better focus.
I mean, the masturbation is actually women who have primary anorgasmia. Women, that is, women who are adults and have never had an orgasm. The therapy, an effective therapy that's being used, is to intentionally masturbate so that they experience orgasms, and then once they learn what it feels like and what stimulation they need to get in order to have an orgasm and what an orgasm is, then they have orgasms with their partner. So they learn how to have orgasms. It's a therapy.
Yeah.
And then they feel better about it because they've never had an orgasm in their entire life, and they're adults. Yeah. And that's the therapy is masturbation.
Yeah, and it can mess up with your mind also. Like I think it's releasing of that energy and releasing of that tension. It's very important for you so that like you don't get frustrated and all these kind of things.
Relaxation.
Yeah, exactly. Overdoing it might cause a problem, which is a separate issue with people because.
Of course, it can cause problem if it becomes addictive and
addictive,
or perverted in any way.
Exactly.
And all those kind of So everything, it's anything powerful can be abused.
Yeah. So
it can have good, can be good or bad depending on how it's used or abused.
All right.
So
all right. So thank you so much for answering my stupid questions. But it was a great having you on the podcast.
My pleasure. Anytime.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.